So this episode and my upcoming guest episode is really important for all of you small business owners to know and hear about because it is going to help give you suggestions from myself as a lawyer and also from Hayley Paige on how to best go about business the right way, the ethical way, and hopefully avoid sticky situations with anyone or other businesses that you may end up partnering with in any capacity as a business owner. Hey there, I'm Paige Griffith, your host and an attorney for small business owners. I help online businesses and creatives get legally legit in no time. This podcast is all about the legal and the page behind it. I'll break down and simplify legal talk while providing practical business guidance every step of the way. And after over a decade in the entrepreneur space and becoming a mother, I'll also be sprinkling in tips for running a business and giving you a glimpse behind the scenes of what life's really like. As a gentle reminder and disclaimer, I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. So be sure to seek legal counsel for personalized advice. Welcome to the Legal Paige Podcast. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. So this episode is more of a precursor to the big guest episode that we have with the Hayley Paige coming out on Wednesday. I really want to ensure that we get all of your questions answered in that one and just have the opportunity to hear straight from her personally. So this episode is more of a background about Hayley Paige's experience as a dress designer, what went down in the contract situation with JLM, the details of the lawsuit, and a general timeline of events. And then to sum it all up, what you can take away from this whole situation and how to apply to your own brand and business from my legal lens. If you're new to the Hayley Paige JLM situation, or you don't really know a whole lot about who she is and why this is important, here's a little bit about her. Hayley Paige is a wedding dress designer who rose to fame between 2011 and 2019 or 20 with her insanely beautiful bridal gowns. She has been featured in Say Yes to the Dress and became a real champion for small business owners and artists and creatives while she was a young woman in her early 20s, navigating all of this when working for a bigger brand and becoming honestly a household name in the wedding industry. So she has since gone through a huge legal battle with her former employer, JLM Couture, who originally signed her on to be their main dress designer under that Hayley Paige brand. But JLM owned the trademarks to the name Hayley Paige under their contractual agreement. And so when Hayley Paige decided to part ways with them, they then restricted her from using any of her social media accounts, which had over 1 million followers that had that Hayley Paige trademark in the name of the handle. They also enforced a 5-year non-compete under their contract and claimed that she had poorly represented the brand. So this episode and my upcoming guest episode is really important for all of you small business owners to know and hear about because it is going to help give you suggestions from myself as a lawyer and also from Hayley Paige on how to best go about business the right way, the ethical way, and hopefully avoid sticky situations with anyone or other businesses that you may end up partnering with in any capacity as a business owner. Now, what I want to do first in this episode is just go through a timeline of events for you because it was really hard for me to sift through, okay, what has happened since like 2011 till 2024? And I outlined and wrote out kind of a big summary for you to really get a grasp on what has occurred with the Hayley Paige JLM lawsuit and what's the lowdown and what happened on social media and then what was the ultimate resolution. So let's go back to 2011. This is when Hayley Paige signed her employment contract with JLM Couture, which allowed JLM to take control over the Hayley Paige brand name and all of the creative assets and the trademarks in exchange for a salary. What's really important is that the employment agreement had very specific stipulations regarding termination from JLM's perspective, terminating Hayley Paige as the designer at any time, but it really didn't have a ton of clauses supporting Hayley Paige's ability to terminate. And that's kind of the whole culmination here. Then between about 2011 and 2019, Hayley Paige blew up the wedding industry, and she became one of the most well-known bridal designers across the world, I would say. She was, like I mentioned, on Yes to the Dress. She also starred in a TLC series, Hayley Ever After. She had a YouTube series called You've Got Paged that gave viewers a behind-the-scenes look at her designer room. She was featured in so many elite bridal publications. She dressed celebrities like Carrie Underwood, Chrissy Teigen, Aly Raisman, Kelsey Ballerini, Olivia Wilde, among others. Her dresses were available in over 500 stores across the country and like 200 plus other countries. And really, Hayley Paige, I would say, was kind of this first big dress designer and real artist in the bigger wedding industry that gave you a peek behind the curtain. Like, this is who I am. This is what I do all day. And that resonated with people. And this makes sense, right, during this time period, because it's during 2011 to 2019, when social media is really getting going, where she is kind of seeing how I can make myself kind of a personal brand and get more people to support the Hayley Paige brand as a whole. Like, it obviously benefited her employment agreement with JLM as well. I'm sure there was like, if we make more money, I make more money, right? But then kind of in 2019, things started going awry. And there was a dispute between Hayley Paige Gutman and JLM Couture. I'm going to refer to her as Gutman kind of throughout the rest of this until she gets her name back. So Gutman kind of went to JLM in an attempt to negotiate her contract sometime in 2019. We're going to talk about this with Hayley. I'd love to dive into this a bit more and really figure out what was this battle that you faced with JLM Couture. Like, why weren't they playing ball with you, especially when you were so well known and notable, and you had amassed a lot of social media success at this point as well, and just media success as a whole. Like, she was all over the television too, and media reports and on large publications and newsrooms. And by this point, personally, I'm like, JLM should have probably taken a different approach here, but they didn't. We'll talk to, Miss Hayley Paige about that. But what Gutman did is she owned these Miss Hayley Paige Instagram accounts and Pinterest accounts. And that, like I mentioned, contained the trademark Hayley Paige in the handle. So that's a huge issue here. And when she created these accounts, it happened after she had signed the employment contract with JLM. But she created these accounts with her personal emails on her personal phone. I know she also kind of went to TikTok around the end of 2019. And this is kind of where things started going south. So her relationship with JLM turned really rocky during this period of time because her and apparently the CEO, Joe Murphy, just started disagreeing about who owned these social media accounts. At the time, she was kind of being a personal brand. And I think she was also getting a lot of attention from other brands. I think she was doing brand deals in kind of more of an influencer respect on these accounts. So it created tension with JLM Couture, who was like, we don't like, from our perspective, how you're representing the brand on these accounts. But she was like, actually, this is better for the business as a whole. Like, why can't you see this? So two varying perspectives here. But that is really what culminated into the lawsuit, big dispute, and her resignation in 2020. So this happened within a period of like 2 weeks. It was crazy. And it went viral on social media. Not to mention, in 2020, we were all glued to our screens and what was happening on social media at the time because we were kind of in lockdown, not in December 2020, but it was still like very much a remote world at that time. So I always like to put into perspective, like, where is the world at when all of this is happening, and how fascinating that this lawsuit went down at this period of time from 2020 through 2024, present day. And really how it all shook out on social media. It was like the first time that a massive lawsuit was being portrayed on social media. Because oftentimes lawyers are telling their clients, like, you shouldn't be talking about this lawsuit. You shouldn't speak to anyone about it. Like what you say can and will be used against you. I mean, that's criminal law, but it still kind of applies to civil law, which is what, this is a civil case here that we're going to be talking about. And Hayley Paige just kind of like went online and was like, I'm going to say everything I want to say about what's going on. And I want to be the first person to present my side of the story here. Okay, sorry. That was a little bit of a tangent. Let's go back to the timeline. Around December 15th, 2020, JLM Couture filed a temporary restraining order. So they were like asking this judge, hey, we want you to restrain and prevent Gutman from posting on any social media account that had the Hayley Paige trademark and the handle, and to hand over all of the passwords to us. And the judge granted that temporary restraining order. Then December 21st, 2020. So we're talking like 6 days after, Hayley Paige resigned from JLM Couture because of all of these legal conflicts and battles. And now there's a TRO against her. And she had to give up her social media accounts. Things got pretty messy online. She posted publicly and garnered a ton of public support. And then JLM had access to her old accounts and they were making posts to share their take. Hayley Paige started All That Glitters on the Gram Instagram account, and that's kind of back and forth what was happening for this first period of time, this first like month or two. And she was really like, she would come on. I don't remember if you guys saw any of this at all. I was following it very closely because this case honestly has so many implications for creatives, influencers that do brand deals, contractual agreements, non-competes. Like it was just so fascinating for the small business world to see this all happen online. And for this really, really well-known dress designer and celebrity, she was a celebrity at the time. For her as a celebrity to go online, and she was so eloquent and so forthright, it took the business world by storm. It took all of us lawyers by surprise as well. So yeah, it wasn't good for Hayley Paige, Miss Gutman, at the beginning. She just lost everything. I feel like she lost so much of what she had worked so hard for a decade. She lost her employment with JLM. They enforced a non-compete. She couldn't do dress designing anymore. She couldn't run her social media accounts, which she worked so freaking hard on. And then after the TRO, the temporary restraining order, was put in place in December of 2020, then the case started, really making headway in the Southern District of New York, and a preliminary injunction was then granted. So what happened here is a temporary restraining order is just a short-term kind of pre-trial type of injunction. And then it needs to move towards a preliminary injunction, which is heard on the merits. And I believe that at some point during this 3-month period, I didn't look too into it, but I'm pretty sure this is how it works because I know how federal cases work. I was a clerk in federal court. And for a preliminary injunction, which is more of like the hardcore injunction that you're looking for because it's not temporary anymore, it would be like throughout the duration of this lawsuit. And that's what JLM wanted. They wanted it to be more of a permanent injunction until the lawsuit was actually decided. They would probably need to have a hearing on the preliminary injunction with both parties' counsels making their case in front of the judge. And then ultimately hear on about March 4th, 2021. So like 3 months after the TRO was issued and all this stuff went down on social media and she had to give up her accounts, then the judge actually granted a hardcore preliminary injunction to JLM Couture. So the injunction prevented her from having her Instagram account. She couldn't have any other social media platforms related to the brand. And they owned all of the trademarks. And they said that the injunction was based on the terms of the contract, which indicated that JLM's ownership of the intellectual property related to their brand name and all of the creative designs, so they should own these social media accounts. Of course, not to anyone's surprise, a district court is not the last stop in a lawsuit like this, and Gutman took the issue up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. She argued that none of these injunctions should have been granted to begin with. She argued a lot about non-competes in the contractual agreement as well. So that is all happening here now between mid-2021 until 2023, actually. And there's not a whole lot that goes on here because it takes a really long time for things to go up to the appellate court level. So you have to file, and then it just sits there until the appeals court takes your case, and then they do a hearing, and then they rule on it. And it can take a really long time, which means that Miss Gutman is kind of deciding what to do on her own and how she is going to move forward in her business journey and really in her personal journey. All That Glitters on the Gram, got so much support. She had, hundreds of thousands of followers then, probably within, days when she was mainly posting about all this stuff at the beginning of the legal battle. But throughout that time, she also kind of decided to do a name change. And I want to talk about that real quick because I think it's extremely interesting from a business owner's perspective on if something goes down with your original brand name, what do you do? What do you do in that situation? And she hardcore shifted and changed course, full 180 degrees. And in August of 2020, amidst this whole legal battle, she officially announces a new name, and that's Cheval, which means horse in French. Now, I want to give a couple quotes here on why she decided to make this change because I found them so endearing, so reflective, so aha moments for one, how you could pitch and market a new brand name. I was genius, but also how people could support her and her new business endeavor, which I'll talk about in a second. So she said, quote, "I came up with Cheval during a brainstorming session with a couple of business mentors and friends and family that have absolutely changed the game for me, and they inspired me to find my silver lining." They would hate a public shout out here, so I'm just going to say to you, you know who you are, and thank you for helping me giddy up and go. So I'm sure that giddy up and go helped her come up with some type of name dealing with a horse. And then, she came up with horse in French. And then she says, "My new name doesn't belong to just me. It's for the trailblazers, the offbeat pathers, the ones who have been kicked around and are not sure which way is up. The ones that have gone to HE double hockey sticks and back. The ones who have put their best foot forward regardless of adversity with which they are met, but do it with a smile. You have inspired me to keep keeping on." I'm that is the quote of all quotes here. One, just so many jabs at JLM Couture, but so much inspiration to business owners across the board here. And then she markets and says that I'm now creating designer shoes under my new Cheval name, under this IG account, She Is Cheval. So she is now, doing All That Glitters on the Gram Instagram account and She Is Cheval account. And she then starts taking, honestly, the designer shoe world by storm. I'm you go, girl. You've got nothing stopping you. I love her. She's such a go-getter. All right. So this is in 2022. She starts doing that. She's this isn't going, I'm sure she's shaking this all out with her lawyers and is hey, I want to design in some capacity. That is who I am and what I love to do. I can't do wedding dress designing or really any type of clothing designing. She didn't want to violate the non-compete. And I'm sure that her legal counsel gave her the go-ahead, shoes is good. You're in a totally different realm here. That's not competing with JLM Couture in any way. And so that's why she decided to do shoes. So she's doing that for about a year and a half, honestly. And then JLM files for bankruptcy in October of 2023. And this is whoa, a big Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I mean, it's all public. And they point to the designer as one of the sources of its financial issues. And they issued this in a press release. So they're basically pointing fingers at Gutman and saying this whole legal battle and everything that she's been doing online and yada, yada has related to our financial issues, which isn't the case. I'm just going to give my little 2 cents here. And JLM was not the best business to begin with. They really needed her to continue being a business in the black. But I digress there. Anyway, bankruptcy proceeding, that is what's happening kind of near the end of 2023. Then at the same time period, the appeal is happening at the Second Circuit. Remember, I told you it takes a while to get there. So it did. They didn't get to argue in front of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals until September of 2023. And then the appeals court took until January 17th, 2024 to actually issue its order. And I've actually written orders for the Court of Appeals. I did this when my district court judge that I worked for sat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the judge heard cases. And then we as the law clerks help him draft orders and decide. Obviously, him and the other judges that sit on the court decide the outcome of the case. But then we as law clerks, it gets assigned to a certain judge to write up the order, and his or her or their law clerks then assist the judge usually in drafting the order. So it takes time, right? Because they argue various cases on a certain date. So there's not just one case that's heard in Court of Appeals on that date. Sorry, I'm giving you a lot of background here on Court of Appeals, but I think it's important because I don't think people fully understand the behind the scenes of what's going on in federal court or state court for that matter. But federal court takes a very, very long time. And the Second Circuit Court of Appeals is not just hearing Hayley Paige and JLM's lawsuit and appeal at that time. They're hearing multiple cases on that date, right? They're batching their work. Wink, wink. And the Court of Appeals is going to have a lot of hearings on a lot of different motions and a lot of different appeals. And then they're going to go back and various judges are going to issue orders on that. And so now I'm back to January 17th, 2024. They finally issue the actual order. So this is a biggie here. What they did is they dismissed Gutman's appeal. They affirmed the lower court's decision to refuse to dissolve the preliminary injunction. But here's the kicker. They vacated in part the district court's order modifying its preliminary injunction. And they said that the court erred in determining ownership of the disputed accounts and failed to assess the, quote, reasonableness of the 5-year non-compete restraint against Gutman. So then they remanded back to the district court for further proceedings. So they're now you went up to the appellate court. Now you got to go back down to the district court level, and the district court needs to sort this out again. This is super important and likely a turning point because the appeals court is district court, you need to reconsider the exclusive control of this Instagram and Pinterest account, and you need to look again at whether the non-compete was too restrictive. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals did opt out of deciding some other issues. For example, it didn't interfere with Hayley's contempt issues. There was some contempt things and orders from the court on her being in contempt of court and having to pay fines. And they didn't rule on any of those. They said, we're not going to rule on those until the litigation was through at the district court trial court level. So that is the beginning of 2024. That was recent. So what do we have at play here? We have the Second Circuit Court of Appeals being here's what the district court needs to redo. So it's going back. And at the same time, we have the bankruptcy proceeding happening in JLM's perspective. And Gutman is a part of that bankruptcy court proceeding because she's a party of interest. And I find this fascinating. Oh my gosh, her legal representation is genius and so smart. On April 15th, 2024, she files a motion in bankruptcy court that would require JLM as the company to sell off its assets rather than recognize them as a party of interest in the bankruptcy proceeding. So I don't know a ton about bankruptcy court. It is a whole other animal. It's this whole other place for adjudication. And I remember when I worked in district court, anything that had to do with bankruptcy stuff, I would go down to the bankruptcy clerk and be walk me through this. I am so lost. All I know is that Gutman here was arguing that the fees associated with JLM's ongoing litigation would just continue to drain the company's finances when it had already faced this huge revenue decline from 2018 to 2022. Obviously, we have COVID happening during that time, but we also have this massive lawsuit and all of these bad things that are going on with the company and Hayley Paige, that is a well-known celebrity and everybody loves her. And they're just saying, Hayley was just saying, this bankruptcy, there's a lot more to this bankruptcy here. And she was a party of interest, so she could claim some things and file motions in the bankruptcy proceedings. JLM, of course, objected to her motion at the end of April, saying in a separate filing that, she was kind of just having this like general agenda of destroying the company. They've always taken this approach, like a hard stance approach that like she's always in the wrong. They're never going to take responsibility for stuff. Then I'm just going to put this in here because this is like pivotal to me, what happened at the end of April. Like so much is going on. She's filing motions in bankruptcy court. They're also, the main court case is being remanded to the district court level. And then the Federal Trade Commission votes to pass a rule that prohibits all employers across the country from entering into or enforcing non-compete agreements with any workers in the United States. Like it was this huge like bomb that dropped on all business owners that this huge federal agency is like, nope, no more non-competes. Of course, this non-compete ruling doesn't apply to any like lawsuits that were already, underway and previous like non-compete dealings. I mean, there's some caveats here, like it might be enforced by September, yada, yada. I'm not going to get into this. I'll get into that in another podcast episode. But I just wanted to point out here that the FTC ruling on non-competes during this huge court case on non-competes that is so public is like, wow. Two really insane things are happening at the same time. And I think both of those being at play here, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals remand back to the district court, the bankruptcy proceeding with JLM, and this FTC ruling on no non-competes anymore for any employers and employees' relationships. I think that is honestly those three things like boom, culminated into this resolution. It's just my take. And we'll talk to Hayley Paige about it herself because I'm interested to see what she thought was like the real shakedown here and what she can really tell us. I don't know like how much she has to keep confidential, but we'll see. We'll see. All right, moving along. I'm almost done with the timeline here, but May 8th, the judge in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, she actually walked back on her previous grant of control of the Hayley Paige social media accounts to JLM Couture. So based on the framework in that opinion from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit that remanded back, they kind of set out a framework for how she needed to reinterpret all of these claims and issues with the intellectual property and contractual agreement. So based on that framework, she just like went full 180 again. And she said that, that you can have the social media accounts back. But then she upheld the ban on Gutman using the Hayley Paige name and promoting and selling competing dresses for 5 years. So she's like, the non-compete still stands for at least 5 years, which at this point, she's like almost a year out. I think right? So she terminated in end of 2020. We're now close, almost. She had like a year and a half at this point left of her non-compete. But anyway, the district court's ruling on May 8th is really confusing because they're like upholding the intellectual property rights of JLM Couture, which are the trademarks, Hayley Paige, but then they're like, you have to give her back her social media accounts. Essentially, she's saying like, you can have your social media accounts, Hayley Paige Gutman, but you probably need to change the handle name. And like, that's not helpful. So then by mid-May, it's really, I think this is what teed up the settlement as a whole. So now you've got the actual district court trying to shake this out as much as possible. You still have the bankruptcy proceeding going on, and you have the FTC non-compete ban. And it's just such a smart move on Hayley Paige's part because she knew that the bankruptcy proceeding was like this huge chess move for her to probably settle more quickly with JLM. And that's indeed what happened. So May 24th, 2024, both parties reached a settlement. Gutman agreed to pay JLM $263,000, and in return, she regained the rights to her name and all associated intellectual property with that name, including the social media accounts and trademarks for her bridal lines. And she was no longer under a non-compete. The settlement itself, it's visible online. It's public. You can go research it. I'll link it in our show notes for you. But I reviewed it and my team and I reviewed it, and we just found it really interesting. One, bankruptcy proceedings are public, so you have to file these types of settlement agreements. It had, really typical language you would see in a settlement agreement, like non-disparagement clauses, waiver of claims, preventing both sides from making any like negative public statements about each other, which we've kind of seen come across. I don't think Hayley Paige has said anything bad since then about JLM. She was like really happy that there was finally a peaceful resolution. And she's just like, I want to move forward. We'll talk more with her on our podcast episode and see what she thinks and what she can and cannot say. But it also had a confidentiality clause. And I'm like, but the bankruptcy proceeding is like clearly very public and the settlement is public and now the news is out. And then she came on her social media account and is like, cool, guess what? Like I am now all that glitters on the gram. She is Cheval and I now own Miss Hayley Paige back again. And she has since been posting the past couple of weeks. So I want to get her take on like what she's going to do with all of these Instagram accounts. I'm sure that's going to take some time for her to decide. I would assume that she's trying to get like some of those followers that like stopped following Miss Hayley Paige when JLM Couture owned those accounts. And now she's going to try to get all of them from All That Glitters on the Gram and She is Cheval like back over to her main account. But we'll see. I bet that's how it like shakes out over time, but we'll see. After the settlement, what's happening is happening right now in current, status quo time. JLM Couture is continuing its Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings without Gutman's involvement. And she is now reclaiming her brand identity and continuing her career in the bridal industry under her name, free from the constraints of her previous contract and owning all of her IP and owning her legal name back. Woo! So happy for you, Hayley Paige. From a lawyer's perspective, this dispute is like the most contentious, high-profile legal battle in the fashion industry that we've really ever seen. It highlights so many complexities of IP rights, employment agreements in creative fields, what you can and should or cannot do in terms of working with brands. So I would like to just quickly give my lawyer take on this whole thing. I'm going to be pretty brief here because I think what's most important is for you guys to hear from Miss Hayley Paige herself, which is going to happen in our next episode. But I have found through my research and through following this just very, very intently for the past 4 years, is that I can't think about this from my lawyer perspective, from my lawyer brain. I'll never forget in law school, the very, very first day of law school, we had this professor come up and he said, you are never going to think about the world the same again. Welcome to law school. Welcome to becoming a lawyer. And it's so true. Like I never, ever can see things from the perspective of like pre-lawyer Paige. I always have the lens of being a lawyer and like from a legal perspective. And particularly here, like now, a decade into being a lawyer, I think about things from my expertise. I'm an intellectual property lawyer, contract lawyer, and business lawyer. And I can't not think about things from what I have learned and how I can best offer advice to all kinds of business owners out there. All right. So number one, here's my lawyer take. Ownership of social media accounts is ever changing. And I think this case sets a lot of precedent for it. So the question of really like who owns social media accounts has been central to this dispute with Hayley Paige and JLM Couture this entire time. And she was really staking her claim for the first time that even though there's some like trademarks associated with it, like the account itself is personal, even if there's a partnership deal there, or here there's an employment agreement at play. And I feel like when the brand and the influencer or the brand and the employee are getting comfortable using that account to hopefully market and advertise for the brand itself, and then the relationship ends, like that is a huge, huge legal issue. And that's really where big brands are going to start saying like parts of that account is theirs. So this also goes hand in hand with brand deals, just with influencers as a whole, right? If you're an influencer online or a micro influencer, you don't have to have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. This is so crucial. And we have done this by negotiating brand deals for influencers as well and reviewing brands' contracts with these influencers. Like who owns the content that is produced on those accounts? Who owns the account first and foremost? And then, who owns any content that's tied to the brand prior to an influencer even posting. Because lots of times the brand wants like equal rights to that content, or they want to be able to share on their account. And then the influencer can never take it down on their account. And that's really interesting, right? Because sometimes things happen with brands and influencers are like, whoa, 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 I want to be like a 10-foot, arm's length away from all of this like shiz that's going down with this brand. So it's really important to think about these things on ownership of social media accounts, ownership of posts on social media accounts, ownership of brand deals across the board. I also think that this case really goes to the heart of how contractual language means a lot when you get into court. I have said this so many times on reading contracts is so important. Please don't skim your contracts. Don't assume everything. Read every single inch of your contract and then ask questions about the parts that you don't 1,000% understand. And here we're seeing like the court is reviewing the contract. Like that is their main piece of evidence here, really their only piece of evidence here that they can make any type of like reasonable interpretation of the claims off of. And the contract was so heavily cited against JLM Couture that Hayley Paige didn't really have a leg to stand on in district court until things, really started going with the appeals court and then, remanding back. But at the beginning, like the contractual language meant so much. And I would say that's where district courts would hang their hat on. Like they don't really have much other evidence or proof to go off of. So please, it is extra important if you're a business owner that if you're in any type of joint ventureship or partnership, or you're selling or acquiring a business of any capacity, or you're just working with another business as a whole, do the work up front. Don't accidentally sign your life away because you didn't read the fine print, and don't get into a contractual relationship without finding an expert. And that's my number 3. Find yourself a lawyer to advise you. If you don't totally know what you're getting into, you need a lawyer. Lawyers are so important. I'm not just tooting my own horn here. We are trained to review and negotiate and guide our clients to the best final outcome. We are always thinking about the future. We're always thinking, okay, what could this clause or the terms in this clause do or have bearing on later down the road for my client? And then you're asking questions to your client. Like, where do you see yourself in 3 years? What happens if, this big brand then takes over this company and like, you don't like this company? There's just so many things at play, and we are trained to think about that. So when you're dealing with an important contract, I always say invest in a lawyer to look it over. It'll be the best money that you ever spent because you are never going to regret the peace of mind you feel knowing that a trained set of eyes has looked everything over with your best interests in mind. To that same point, my number 4 here on my lawyer take is think about your long-term plan. This is more just like as a business, and it's actually something I've really been thinking about myself. If you listen to my previous episode, I talked a lot about this, but I am now no longer kind of in the beginning stages of building my business. And now I'm in the middle stages, and there's always going to be an exit at some point. I recently went to this mastermind and they were telling me like, every business exits. Every business owner has to exit their business, whether that's selling your business or shutting the business down, or you like no longer being around to run the business. And it was this epiphany moment where I was like, God, I wish someone would have talked to me about this when I first started my business. Because you're like so in the trenches of building your business and thinking about like the shiny things and the shiny objects that you're not thinking about how you want your career to stand the test of time, right? You need to regularly reflect on your 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. I don't want you to like, meticulously look at like a color-coded spreadsheet of what your business is going to look like down the road, but just give yourself a general idea of what you might want your business to look like in the future. That's what lawyers are doing when they're reviewing our contracts. So you can even do them a solid and be like, hey, here's this contract. Here are all the potential things that I may end up doing with my business that I've jotted down over time or that are still in my head and I've been brainstorming, because that is really good for a lawyer to then advise you appropriately. And you're going to be able to like point to clauses in a contractual agreement whether that's a joint venture partnership or an employment agreement or, contractor relationship or anything, you're going to be able to better read and point out clauses in those contracts to yourself better that don't seem right or they don't align with your future plan. And you're thinking about it from that perspective. It's totally different. It's totally different to read a contract that way. So when you are looking down the road, you are going to make more effective legal decisions that will ultimately serve you, of course, both today and a decade from now, right? All right, number 5 here. This is the very last thing. Trademark everything. I want you to literally own as many trademarks as you can in relation to your business. That means any of course, your brand names, your logos, your sub-brand names, your taglines, anything like that. I want you to own trademark-wise. Also, don't forget other intellectual property like copyrights and trade secrets. You need to look into owning those as well. The more IP you can own, honestly, the more monetary value that your business has and the more goodwill that is associated with those intellectual property rights to your business. And then here with Hayley Paige itself, I think this is a huge learning lesson for everyone. And I'm sure she will know this moving forward throughout the rest of her life. And everyone really found this out when this lawsuit happened, is if your business name is your real name, please make sure you own the trademark or your LLC does. Like signing your first and middle or first, middle, and last or last name or anything like that away is just not going to probably go well because I would, partnerships or employment relationships usually don't last forever. I would say there's probably less than 5%, 1% chance. I don't know the actual statistics on that, but we all know breakups happen all the time in the business world. I would say partnerships break up 80, 90% of the time. So if you are in any type of business transaction with somebody, make sure you own trademarks that you need to own. If your business name is a part of it, you need to own it. I've done that with the legal page itself. My name is in the business name. I own the trademark. I'm not going to ever sell that unless, there's my name, likeness, everything is involved in that. But my business owns it right now. So I have the rights to be able to decide what to do with that trademark name. Just so you know, sometimes trademarking, this is a little bit of an aside here, but it's really important to know trademark-wise that you oftentimes cannot trademark surnames or legal names unless they have secondary meaning. And here, of course, Hayley Paige had a ton of secondary meaning. It wasn't just her name. It was there was so much notoriety behind it. So easy to trademark at that point. That's kind of how Beyonce and Taylor Swift and, all those people can trademark personal names, but it is oftentimes really, really difficult for lay people to trademark personal names. Just know that. Okay, I'm moving on here. Essentially, you don't want to get into a sticky situation like Miss Hayley Paige where someone else owns and is using your name to do business. Okay, that was a little long-winded, but let me just go through those 5 things again. My lawyer take and things I want you to be aware of due to this whole JLM Couture Hayley Paige lawsuit situation. 1, pay special attention to ownership of social media accounts and all of your posts on that account. 2, contractual language means a lot when you get into court. So read your contracts. 3, find yourself a legal expert to advise you if you just don't totally know what you are getting yourself into. 4, as a business owner, think about your long-term plan, not just short-term wins. 5, trademark everything, own as much intellectual property as possible. My friends, I am so excited to sit down with Hayley Paige to get her take. And if you're listening to this episode in real time, please go send me your questions that you have for her. I want to make sure that this guest episode that we are having with her is catered towards what you care about as a business owner. So shoot me a DM on Instagram with anything you may want to know, and I will make sure to put that question in my outline so I don't forget to ask it to her. I will try to get through as many as I can so we can really learn from what she went through. And lastly, if you are interested in working with an intellectual property attorney at all to secure your brand names, sub-brand names, logos, taglines, like I mentioned, my law firm, Griffith Law, is actually currently taking on clients. And we would love to do a business audit with you to help you kind of better understand what assets you may or do own, what you can better protect. And I want to make sure that you are doing what you need to do on the legal back end for your business that you've worked so hard to create. That's my job here as an attorney. So I will provide a link in this episode's description for you to book a call with one of our firm's attorneys, and we can get started right away. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. I know it was a long one, but it was a really good legal deep dive into this lawsuit to prepare us for our conversation with Miss Hayley Paige herself. I will catch you in that next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's show. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for contract templates, blogs, YouTube videos, and additional legal resources. If you haven't already, head over to iTunes and leave me a review and rating. It truly means so much to me to hear your feedback and inspires me to continue creating podcast content. Also, I want to personally invite you to my free Facebook group at tlpfacebook.com, where you will get access to me, my legal team, and thousands of other entrepreneurs in there for unlimited business and legal Q&A. Until next time, my friend.